When I bought a home in a flood zone more than a decade ago, I thought I was getting peace of mind, but instead I got major headaches. My pricing was wrong. I didn't know if I had adequate coverage, and I didn't know if I was going to be covered if I had a flood. Look, if you're a homeowner who has gone through the same frustration, then this video is for you. Or if you're a potential homeowner, in this video, we're going to walk you through the top flood insurance problems to avoid. And we're talking about pricing, we're talking about adequate coverage, and we're talking about claims. So let's get started. But before we do, make sure to share, subscribe, and like the channel below. Welcome to the Flood Insurance Guru. I'm Chris Green, your guide in today's video on the top 3 flood insurance problems. We're talking about pricing, we're talking about adequate coverage, and we're talking about claims. So let's talk about pricing first. Now, when I bought a house more than a decade ago, I was told that flood insurance premium was going to be $3,000 when it should have been $300. Look, pricing is a major issue on flood insurance. We see what costs people homes every day. We see it drive people out of homes every day. And one reason is that it's very hard to understand how flood insurance pricing is built. So let's talk about the National Flood Insurance Program first. The National Flood Insurance Program no longer uses flood zones to determine flood rates. They use things like you can see right here behind me, distance to water. They use the replacement cost of your property. They use type of flooding frequency, the elevation of your building. These are all things that are going into a pool to determine your rate. The problem is the National Flood Insurance Program doesn't tell us, hey, 20% here, 20% there. So it's really hard to tell customers with the National Flood Insurance Program that, hey, if you do this, it's going to save you 20%. Now, what we've discovered is that replacement cost is a huge driving factor. That mitigation measures don't have as big of an impact as they used to. The further you are above that base flood elevation can still make a big difference. In fact, it can even change your flood zone. Like I changed mine more than a decade ago. So with the National Flood Insurance Program too, when you go from agent to agent, the pricing should be the same. The problem is that many times it's not, because people are putting in different coverages, different deductibles. And look, when someone tells you, hey, raise your deductible because it's going to save you a bunch of money with your flood insurance policy with the federal program, like it typically saves you $50 to $100 a year to go from a $5,000 deductible to a $10,000 deductible. You're taking on way more risk. And remember, that's a $10,000 deductible for your building and your contents coverage, which we'll get into in just a second. Now let's talk about pricing with the private flood insurance. Now, private flood insurance pricing is all over the board, unlike the federal program, which is basically set. You know, we may see one rate $400, we may see another rate $4,000. They're looking at all different things. They're building risk differently. They're looking at a lot of things like the National Flood Insurance Program, like distance to water, replacement cost, elevation of your building, flood loss history. And then they're looking at something called a flood risk score. You can get yours right here in the bottom of this video that we've built for you. They're taking this and they're building an overall risk profile for you and giving you a rate, which is why you may get a $400 rate with one company and a $4,000 rate with another. In fact, your renewal may go up as well. We've seen companies go from $350 a year on a flood insurance policy to $10,000 because the way their contracts change when they're a surplus company. We see it happen every day on pricing. And this is one of the reasons why pricing is such a big problem with flood insurance. It's all over the board, and there's not enough transparency on how these rates are being built, at least with the federal government. At least with private, you can get a little more accuracy on how it's being built. And that's why it's such a big problem. Remember though, when it comes to pricing, with it being a problem though, you want to make sure you get quotes from the National Flood Insurance Program and from at least 3 different private flood insurance companies when you're picking your flood insurance agent. It's important that they understand local risks like this. They understand, hey, replacement cost is going to have a bigger factor here, so let's make sure we've got this right in line, that we're not off a little bit. Look, we've seen the wrong replacement cost homeowners like yourself thousands of dollars a year. It almost cost me thousands of dollars a year if I had not known to question it. Now let's talk about problem number 2, and we're talking about adequate coverage. Look, the National Flood Insurance Program offers up to $250,000 in building coverage and up to $100,000 in contents coverage. The problem is that many times this isn't adequate coverage. You know, in 2024, on average, In places like Alabama and Georgia, the average replacement cost of a home may be above $350,000. So if you were like me, where I had a replacement cost of my home of $375,000, but I can only get $250,000, what's happening with the difference there? Am I going to be stuck? That could be $125,000 that I'm out. Well, this is where things like private flood insurance and excess flood insurance come in place. Let's talk about excess flood insurance real quick. When you have a national flood insurance program policy up to $250,000, and you have an excess policy that covers above that, you kind of put these two policies together to give yourself adequate coverage. You can also just take out a private policy that covers the replacement cost up to a certain amount typically. Remember, private flood insurance is typically going to cover building coverage up to the replacement costs. They're going to give you replacement cost on contents, which the National Flood Insurance Program is not here in 2024. They're also going to give you additional living expenses, which means if your house floods, like this right here does, you have a temporary place to live. And I'll tell you a quick story. We had a customer in Nebraska back in 2018 that had a lot of lake flooding. She was the only person on her street that had a private flood insurance policy. She had additional living expenses, and she talked about the emotional and financial stress that was taken off her family knowing she did not have to pay for a place to live when her place was being repaired. This is how vital this coverage can be. It could be the difference between bankruptcy and foreclosure. On adequate coverage, remember, you always want to insure your property for replacement costs, whether it be with an excess policy or a private policy, or maybe it is with the National Flood Insurance Program. But making sure that you've got your replacement cost at least within 80%, to make sure your policy does not come in actual cash value, and come claims time, you're very disappointed. Now let's talk about problem number 3, and that is claims. Look, we see it every day during Hurricane Helene and Milton. Thousands of people being denied claims. Why is that? Well, first of all, let's set the record straight. A lot of these people that were denied is because they didn't have flood insurance. In fact, it was said that less than 1% of the victims in Hurricane Helene in North Carolina had flood insurance because they didn't think they had a flood risk. And you can click in the description of this video to find your flood risk score on your property. The other reason we see these claims denied and why it's such a big problem is people aren't sure exactly what to document, whether it be with the National Flood Insurance Program or private. Look, you should always be taking photos and videos if you can of any damage. In fact, in the corner of this video, you can watch our playlist on flood claims to make sure that you're properly protected. Also, making sure that you properly report this proof of loss within 60 days. That's generally the National Flood Insurance Program's policy, and the same thing with most private flood insurance policies. And going through this though, this should help you be more successful with your claim. Look, we had this happen with a customer where they got a very low claim amount on a structure, and we discovered that, hey, this thing was not inspected correctly. So we had to go back to a carrier and say, look, you didn't inspect this correctly, and get it corrected for the customer. So when you're picking your flood insurance agent, you want to make sure they can do these things for you, that they understand the difference between the National Flood Insurance Program. They understand the difference in private flood insurance and how to dispute these claims. And once again, you can discover all that in that playlist. So today, on the top 3 problems with flood insurance, we've talked about flood insurance pricing, we've talked about flood insurance coverages, and we've talked about flood insurance claims. Look, if you're a homeowner or potential homeowner and you want to avoid the headaches that I went through more than a decade ago, click in the description. We'd be happy to work with you and help you with your flood insurance, maybe even advise you on your flood insurance claim, how to have the right protection, and how to minimize your costs on your flood insurance. And it's very simple. In the description, go to our website, fill out that form. Review the proposal we send you, finalize your policy. It's that simple to making sure that you have the right flood insurance pricing, the right coverage, and that your claim is successful. I'm Chris, the Flood Insurance Guru, and I want to say thank you for watching today's video on the top 3 flood insurance problems here in 2024 and 2025. Thank you.